Assalamualaikum everyone, and welcome to the ILAM Research Webinar Series 2020. Thank you for spending your day and joining us today. The session today is part of ILAM's webinar series that we started off this year as part of the continuous professional development programs. So it is intended for ILAM to share findings from our research to benefit all members. I'm Associate Professor LAR Dr. Khalila Zakaria, and today we'll be sharing findings from one of the ILAM research grant projects. So as we know, last year, ILAM started to conduct research grant projects in 3 areas of studies. So we had researchers examine 3 topics, which are green certification criteria relevant to landscape architectural projects, feasibility study on the establishment of standard specification for softscape, and feasibility study on the establishment of ILAM standard form of contract. So the idea of conducting these research projects are for us to find out whether there are certain things that we need to move on to forward, and then there are certain things that we need to further develop as part of our landscape architecture industry. So with us today, we have an esteemed researcher to share the findings on the study for ILAM standard form of contract. With us today, we have LAR Dr. Muhammad Sallehuddin Noor from Universiti Putra, Malaysia. Dr. Sallehuddin has conducted research on green procurement in Malaysian construction industry. And today he will share on whether it is feasible for ILAM to develop our own standard form of contract. So please welcome Dr. Sallehuddin to share about the findings from his study.
Ella, thank you very much. When I was tasked with this assignment, it was the ILAM members specifically tell me that there are a few issues in landscape construction particularly. One of them is that the Construction Industry Development Board has established a competency standard for construction project manager and construction managers. And this actually has specified a few criteria within these specific competencies, and it actually have made clear the works that related with their specification in project management. So I think it's good for ILAM to embark on this exercise to see whether there are possibilities. Is there any possibilities in establishing a standard form of contract for landscape architecture in Malaysia? Okay. So the studies that were conducted is the basis from this argument that there are various major revamp in certification construction project manager and certified construction manager that will change the competency for Malaysian construction industry and will influence landscape architecture indirectly. And one of the other reasons is that there are issues in landscape work quality element in QLASIC assessments since 2007 to date, particularly in landscape that is below par and mostly related with government construction project. And of course, there are related various green rating tools throughout Malaysia, with of course involving landscape architecture project at city level and will become compulsory in 2020, particularly in government-led projects. So there are a few major changes since construction industry transformation program were introduced. Okay, so this research is actually was aimed to investigate the feasibility of establishment of ILAM standard form of contract. And the findings are divided into 3 deliverables. Okay, these are the methodologies that are being adopted throughout the research. Okay, mostly are qualitative methodology, thematic analysis, and interview. And from that, we conclude what are the possibilities from the feasibility attributes that we can identify in this research. Okay. So since we are landscape architects and we are not lawyers, it is good for us to at least understand what are the contexts, what is the context of construction law in Malaysian construction industry. I would like to share with you if we do not really aware or as aware of what standard form of contract actually will affect us will end up with dispute resolution at the end of each project. Okay, so we need to understand in the bigger context, in the most biggest context, is the law of contract in Malaysian construction industry, which constitute formation, variating factor, discharge and remedies, nature of industry, professional, project and procurement. Okay, and then there are also the generic type of contract. We know that there are always conventional design and bid and collaborative contract, but there are also custom contracts that being built, particularly from international project or international client with international contractors. Okay, and then we also have procurement strategies, okay, which include risk allocation, and then standard forms that we have now, mostly that we have in Malaysia are standard forms that was established by a certain organization. And then we also have liability and in contract and tort, which actually the substance of law related with damages, related with negligence, okay, related with workers' compensation, and a lot of acts are imbued within the liability if we engage in certain construction project. And when the project initiated on site, there is always contract administration stage, whereby we can see that there are a lot of issues in time, payment, delay and disrupt, issues on bonds, contract administrator itself, and subcontracts. Okay, and if we don't really understand this ecosystem, we'll end up with disputes, whether it's big or not. It's still a dispute, and it's actually tarnishing the construction industry that actually already fragmented in its nature. Okay, and for the deliverable one, to investigate mechanism process of existing form of contract used in built environment projects, I've identified that there are at least 14 elements in existing standard form of contract, particularly in Malaysia. Okay, the first part is contract document, which the priority is that all parties concerned in the project management. And then there is contract sum, which involves sufficiency, adjustment, and claim. There are also variation involving contract administrator, amount, power to do variation, queries, and impact of variation. There are also time and money claim, which involve prevention and loss or expense, extension of time for completion involving extension, provision, post-condition, procedure, and work program, money claim, which involve loss and expense method, the affecting money claim, procedure, ascertainment, payment to contractor, and all this. Okay, so I'm not going to go detail on this because in this research we involve a lot of paperwork and words. Okay, when we study specific standard form of contract, we will always involve ourselves with clauses. We'll always involve ourselves with implied statement, specific statement, okay, imbued statement. So we need to study on this, and you will find along my sharing session here involved with a lot of words. Okay, okay, particularly for landscape, from the existing standard form of contract in Malaysia, we realize that landscape work is usually allocated as provisional sum in bill of quantity, particularly in government project. In existing standard form of contract, hence other parts that relate with landscape architecture or landscape work are lumped in most cases. And then matter that relevant and feasible to landscape architecture is environmental matters related with Environmental Quality Act, particularly because currently the landscape works being seen as a supplement for construction project if we see it in building units. But when we see landscape architecture project in a holistic understanding involving, let's say, a big parks, or maybe an urban forest, then landscape project itself is actually standing alone. It does not really involve with building. So these are the matters that involve with Environmental Quality Act that we can see. Okay, and then all the 14 elements and sub-elements are focusing on building works that we have in existing standard form contract in Malaysia, which we can use or we can apply for ILAM standard form of contract. And depending on the future possibility of variant for our standard form contract, the element of existing standard form contract should be readjust to suit the ILAM standard form of contract variant. Okay. And the need to understand each part and how it relates among each other in established ILAM standard form of contract. So we need to understand the different part, what I've said just now, the 14 parts that we can use to include in our standard form of contract if it's possible. And for deliverable one also, we realize that there are also further studies that need to be done to establish our standard form of contract related with what are the subsequence of Environmental Quality Act that we need to see, what are the management, what are the powers in EQA that actually affecting landscape architecture, what are the environmental multilateral agreements that related with ministries and private sector in construction, because with the current condition of international agreement and the current condition of COVID-19, there are a few changes in agreements that affecting the current law in Malaysia. What are the statutes related to physical environment, particularly TPO and EIA, and the likes, because we know that statutes are different among states. We know that Sabah Sarawak use ordinance, but in Putra they have their own statutes for landscape. We have we don't have actually landmark court cases that published related to landscape work yet. So we need actually to see what are the possibilities, what are the cases, court cases that have been established that relate with landscape work that we can use as references for our future amendments in establishment of this standard form of contract. There are also future compulsory green rating tools that we need to see, like MyCRES or Metrai Hijau Melaka or Green RE. Okay? And the most important part is the ease of use of the standard form of contract. What are the attraction for industry player to actually use the standard form of contract compared to other existing standard form of contract in Malaysia? Okay, for deliverable B, to investigate the framework, okay, particularly related with landscape architecture. So this is a global study that we did, and the main finding that related with standard form of contract in landscape architecture globally is that existing standard form of contract directly related to landscape architecture is strongly influenced by previous legal system context. Okay, we have America with their own standard form of contract in landscape architecture, and it's influenced by their law and so forth. Okay, and other standard form of contract also are short with minimum amount of parts in condition of contract. And compared to the existing standard form of contract in Malaysia, we have 14 parts, so they have a very minimal amount of parts, and they can remove or change within their specific need in project management. Okay, so we know that the existing American Society of Landscape Architects standard form of contract have 8 parts or article, right? And compared to Landscape Institute standard form of contract, they have 8 parts, but only detailed in condition of contract. Okay, and these are similar parts, but the terminology and details are different, and most likely it is compressed and concise. Okay, and in the reports that I've published with ILAM, the bold item I've identified is the differences. Okay? And then both standard form of contract that directly related with landscape architecture in Malaysia is particularly use, practice or guidance notes that improve periodically. Okay. So another finding that I found in this research is that there are 6 criteria that can be studied in existing standard form of contract, which indirectly influence the establishment of ILAM standard form of contract. We have the umbrella law. We need to identify the specific type of standard form of contract. What are the related regulations? What are the related guidelines, the remedies, and the alternative dispute resolutions? Okay, so these are new terms and new field for landscape architecture globally and particularly in Malaysia. Okay, and from the finding that in the research, we've identified there are actually 2 standard form of contract globally that directly involve with landscape architecture, particularly from America, the American Society of Landscape Architects and the Landscape Institute standard form of contract. Okay. Okay, in United Kingdom and Ireland, particularly the Landscape Institute standard form of contract, they have a few standard form of contract that being used. Okay, but there are also related specific regulation in construction industry, and there are also guidelines from other related industry that need to be considered, that they need to be read together with standard form of contract. Okay, and we can see that in standard form of contract from Landscape Institute of London, they have actually identified and listed the condition of contract in all their different type standard form of contract. Okay, they have landscape work contract, they have landscape work with contract design, and landscape work maintenance work. Okay, and specifically in managing the standard form of contract, they have guidance note attached with the standard form of contract, and they have updated the guidance note which available on their website to be downloaded. Okay, for United States of America, it is quite hard to find the literature review or standard form of the standard form of contract itself, because it is limited. It is not being studied too much there, but there is always finding that we can see differences between America and UK in terms of standard form of contract in landscape architecture. Okay. A bit different from UK, the American standard form of contract, particularly the American Society of Landscape Architects, involve a bit different approach related with professional, because they have we can see in remedies, security, and insurances, they have a certain way of dealing with contractor and insurance program. So these are the differences that we need to highlight and the nuance that we need to consider if we want to establish our standard form of contract. Okay, and the standard form of contract provided by American Society of Landscape Architects is quite long. They have 8 articles, and each of them is spelled out, but it's still 8 parts. Compared to existing standard form of contract in Malaysia, we have 14 parts. We have spelled out our terms in detailed manner. Okay. Okay, for the deliver to, I've also did some interview with the practitioner, only 2 within a limited time, and what happened actually is they really want to see the visible, the tangible standard form of contract in front of them to be read before the interview is done, because that's how they can understand better and answer the question in interview session. So that is part of the limitation in this study. Okay, because there's no tangible standard form of contract yet to be shared with the industry player, particularly for this interview session. So the findings are mostly related with more on the managerial part rather than the technical part. Okay, so the finding involve 4 thematic keyword, which is the significance, the usefulness, the recommendation, and the potential limitation. Okay. The significance is that it need to be seen significantly with the landmark cases in landscape architecture. What are the landmark cases in landscape works that actually provide the ground for establishment of the standard form of contract? And then the usefulness of the standard form of contract also, we need to determine by the existing bodies of law and regulation, as well as the stakeholders at project, particularly related with landscape. Okay? And among the recommendation is that if it's too hard, then standard form of contract in landscape architecture should be used as a supplementary for the existing standard form of contract. It will become one of the attachments for the existing standard form of contract in Malaysia, and it really need to compare with the existing structure, part, and clause related with existing standard form of contract. And the potential limitation is that what are the possibilities of this standard form of contract will be used in construction industry? Does it involve in built environmental only? So These are the questions that being pointed out by the interviewee along the interview session. Okay. For the final part, the recommendation for ILAM is quite long because a lot of caveat need to be overseen before the establishment of standard form of contract is done. Okay, is embarked. So the general finding is that we, as an organization, need to aware the establishment of provision law for standard form of contract in each nation. Okay, there are also globally in landscape architecture standard form of contract that government-based, private-based, professional-based, organization-based, and custom-based. Okay, so we need to aware this. So our standard form of contract could be generic as possible and can be used as wide as possible. And then there are also the understanding of standard form of contract is rather procedural law, which embed substantive law that we need to understand. So we need to understand what are the doctrine in construction law that we can imbue in our standard form of contract, and what are the relative specific regulation or acts that influencing the standard form of contract that we want to establish related with health, environment, and quality. There are also court cases that we need to find related with landscape work, so we can understand what are the mechanics of dispute that can be used in mitigating the impact of using standard form of contract if something happened at the end. Okay, what are the statute? Okay, the related guideline, the specific method of measurement that can be used in our standard form of contract, and then the remedies, insurance, securities. Okay, what are the dispute resolution that the route for dispute resolution that we can use along the way if something happened. And the most important part is what are the attraction element of this standard form of contract that could be the promotion part for this standard form of contract to be used by the industry players. So the suggestion that that I've come about in this study is that there are 4 possibilities of ILAM standard form of contract. Okay? There are quantities, conventional procurement, design and build. We also could establish standard for subcontractor only, with as minor work, but it is most possible to establish our own supplementary for existing standard form of contract that we can attach with CIDB standard form of contract or PWD, Public Work Department standard form of contract. But we need to consider there are a few elements in establishing standard form of contract, which is the law, the type of standard form of contract that we want to establish, related statute, remedies, alternative dispute, and main body of contract and the categories or the parts. So in the end, if we want to establish a standard form of contract, we also need to consider both macro and micro ecosystem. The macro ecosystem will involve regulation, which is the contract, the tort, and all the doctrine. We need also to establish strategic relationship with Malaysian Bar Council, the court, construction court, and economic planning unit. And we need to understand what are the statutes applied to specific physical environment related to infrastructure or landscape work. What are the standards that were established, or is there any future standard that we need to establish to support the standard form of contract? What are the promotion that we need to establish, need to push along the way to ensure that this standard form of contract is being used? What are the method of education and training related with mediator, arbitrator, adjudicator, so that issues in landscape, which is quite different from building works, can be remedied. And then incorporating the standard form of contract into syllabus of higher learning. Okay, and we also need to produce practice guidance notes, okay, amendments periodically, and the managing secretariats. And for the micro ecosystem, we need to see what are the options of ILAM standard form of contract establishment. Other than what I've suggested, maybe there are a few. And then the combination or separation of parts from the existing standard form of contract in landscape architecture, particularly from Landscape Institute and American Society of Landscape Architects, so that we can start our endeavor in establishing the standard form of contract. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sallehuddin. Meanwhile, we invite members to engage in a discussion with the researcher and have the Q&A session via the comment section below. And if you haven't answered the poll, please respond to the poll, because we would like to hear from you as well. And don't forget to screenshot your attendance in this webinar. So Dr. Sallehuddin has tabulated and analyzed various standards form of contracts for landscape architecture from different countries and different agencies. And this was done to extract the similarities and differences, and to identify where are the areas that are applicable for us to learn from to adopt and adapt in our landscape architecture industry in Malaysia. And based on the findings from the research, if we were to establish the ILAM standard form of contract, we definitely have to consider the detailed procedures, laws, and also sync together with other agencies and look into the bigger ecosystem. So we have reached now to the end of our ILAM webinar series. And from the findings of the research projects, ILAM will take the necessary steps of actions to further develop the needs of our profession and professional members. We will also be publishing these research findings in the ILAM website. And on behalf of ILAM, I would like to thank Dr. Sallehuddin for conducting the research project and sharing the findings today. Thank you also to all members in Malaysia and abroad who are tuning in and have joined our ILAM Research Webinar Series 2020. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this ILAM webinar so that it might benefit others as well. And also like our ILAM FB page and subscribe to our ILAM YouTube channel. And after the session, if you have any further suggestions, you're welcome to reach ILAM via email. And if you'd like to share any ideas, feel free to approach any of the council members. Until the next ILAM webinar research series, keep advocating landscape architecture. Assalamualaikum and have a good day.